And hello, everyone, and good morning, and welcome to another episode here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is an historian making their official debut here on the channel and discussing a topic that honestly is a first on the show and one that I am very, very excited to have talked about. Now, my guest today holds a PhD from the University of Leeds, where her research focused on the role and significance of war horses during the reigns of Edward I and Edward II. A lifelong equestrian enthusiast, he has owned and competed with horses for many years, combining academic expertise with hands-on experience in the equestrian world. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, Dr. Emma Herbert-Davis. Dr. Davis, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. I don't need much of an excuse to talk about war horses, to be quite honest. So it's a pleasure to introduce them to the wide world.
Awesome. And honestly, as I said off camera, I'm very excited to learn about how you came to the conclusion that war horses are going to be your area of expertise, as well as the research that you've learned. So I guess that's a good icebreaker question. How did you sort of come to the realization that this was the area that you wanted to focus on?
Well, I've always loved horses, and I've always had horses. So I've always been interested in just about everything to do with them and read up quite a lot about them. And I decided, actually, it was when my daughter left home and I'd done my parenting, that I would go back to university and get myself a degree, and that developed into a master's, and I loved it so much. I thought, yes, I'm going to be doing a PhD. And it made real sense that I kept horses as the focus because it gave me a unique perspective, because obviously I've known horses and kept horses and ridden them and trained them and competed them for decades. So I already had that basis, that grounding. And it was always going to be the medieval period as well, because that always attracted me, because there were so many questions that hadn't been answered. So combining those two, I thought, if I've got a great long period of study, and it took me about almost 5 years, it has to be something that you're really interested in, and you say you're going to sustain that enthusiasm and that momentum. And so it was horses. But the reason I chose war horses and not just your ordinary everyday horses is because it's the war horses that are best documented, because we have the royal accounts, we have a lot of government stuff as well that's recording about these horses. And it's much more difficult to find information on ordinary horses that were maybe pulling carts or carrying loads. So
Right.
war horses was far more accessible and actually really exciting as well, because I quite like the military side of the medieval period. And I felt that no one had really asked the right questions about these horses. And although we know quite a lot about the horses that were used in World War I and II, because they took thousands upon thousands of horses into war there,
Right.
we have been doing that for millennia. And nobody had really tackled this issue of, oh, yes, we took horses to war and knights rode horses. But no one had really asked, well, where did they get them from? What did these horses look like? How were they trained? And really crucially, what actually happened to them in warfare? How did they look after them? So I had this whole bunch of questions that I could not find answers to. And that was the start of my PhD.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And I already have a lot of questions already stewing in my head that I want to ask you. Before we get to that, I am very curious. So from your bio, you mix your passion for equestrians with your passion for history. But going a little bit further back in your history, what really drove you to pursue history as a subject before expanding upon it and really focusing in on war horses in particular?
That's a really good question. That's something that I've been thinking about recently, of I decided I was going to go to university. I hadn't had that opportunity before, and I knew I could go in as a mature student. So what was I going to study? And history kind of came naturally to me because it was something I was really interested in. But I think I think there's a deeper reason as well why perhaps people, especially myself, was attracted to history. And I think I was trying to find roots. I think I was quite rootless. I came from a forces family. We moved constantly. We didn't have a lot of contact with the wider family. So I think I was looking for something there. I think there's a Welsh word called hireth, which is a longing, a homesickness for a place that doesn't even really exist. And I think that was part of my motivation as well, this hireth, this wanting to find a connection, to find roots. And that's when I started to study history. And that actually gave me that sense of belonging, that sense of community, of discovering our past and where we came from and the reasons why we do things still today. So I think perhaps that was that deeper psychological process going on there.
Fascinating. Absolutely love it. Absolutely. So now let's focus in on what you've learned as a historian by focusing on war horses and the history of war horses in history, specifically the medieval period. So when you got your master's first and then your doctorate, what was ultimately your goal going forward as an historian? And also, when crafting the history about war horses, what was going to be your promise to others in the scholarship who may use your research for their papers and for their historiographies?
My goal was to find out the truth, was to answer a series of questions that I had that I considered important, which was, where did they come from? What did they look like? How were they trained? How were they bred? How were they managed? Everything around this whole concept of the war horse. And I wanted to do a PhD on this because I knew it was going to be very academically rigorous. So it's not a case of being subjective about it. It was finding information. And in essence, I was a historical detective because it's really down to forensic level research to be able to find these kind of things out. And I loved doing that. I loved digging through things, looking at original manuscripts as well, which are in these wonderful rolls in the archive. I had to learn Latin. I had to learn paleography, which is how to decipher the writing as well. And I'm looking at stuff that in some cases nobody's actually looked at, and extrapolating this information like a detective, trying to find answers to questions. And my promise to everybody and to myself was, don't try and make it fit your preconceived ideas. Even if it goes against what you thought happened, you have to say the truth. You have to put it forward to people that this happened. People had this kind of attitude. And some of it's fairly unpalatable as well about how the horses ended up on campaign, which I kind of suspected it might be as well. But I still felt that this had to be brought out into the open, because it's not just people who were affected by warfare. It was also the animals that they took with them as well. And I really wanted to give these horses a voice. It was kind of like a remembrance, really, for them. Like we've done to horses in the First and Second World War, I wanted to encompass all the horses that had gone into battle with man as well.
That very much reminds me of almost like the premise of War Horse by Steven Spielberg. That same mentality of, yes, you had young men fighting in the war, but World War I was the last, if you count World War II, the two last great wars in human history where you had horses being used in the armed forces. Many horses from the countryside were taken and trained to be war horses, as opposed to certain horses which were selectively bred to be war horses. It's a very fascinating study when you really look at it and the history behind it. And my knowledge of that area is very limited. But what I do know, and I think you may also agree with Dr. Davis, is that horses also represented a symbol of status. I mean, if you could afford a war horse, that was something of great wealth. And horses were an investment. They were not, to use the modern word, cheap. They were very expensive. You had to care for them. You had to make sure they were healthy. And if a horse was killed, that was a huge, huge loss. And if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Davis, but also during the medieval period, and even going a little bit earlier in the medieval age, specifically the Crusades, if you were to kill another knight's horse in retaliation or due to some argument, it was a very serious offense because horses were not only a status of wealth, but they were also a symbol of either that army, that king, or that kingdom.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. And I think you've hit on some really pertinent points there. But what we have to bear in mind is when we look in the past, there were no cars, there were no trucks or tanks or jeeps or anything to go to warfare. It was all done by horses. And just like your CEO of a company today might turn up in his Mercedes and everybody knows he's a very important, powerful person because he's got a brand new car and a very expensive car. This is how status reflected on horses. So the people at the very top, the nobles, rode the destriers, the very, very expensive, highly trained horses. And then there was this sort of sliding scale of horses down to sort of your common sergeants that were also riding as part of the troop. So yes, horses were status. And if you were a king, you imported a lot of them and you had the very best horses and they were incredibly expensive. And yes, it was not considered very chivalric to kill an opponent's horse. But you look in the literature and you look at the manuscript images, it happened all the time. It was going to in warfare anyway. So basically, yes, they are a casualty of fighting and warfare as much as men were as well. And I do have documents showing that people were put into prison if they injured a nobleman's horse. So there is that idea of status. Then you've got Thomas Becket of when he was shamed, instead of people attacking him, they cut the tail off and ears off his horse. So effectively targeting his horse rather than him. But it was this physical symbol, as you said, of a person as well. And in that way, they were incredibly important.
Yes. And also, there's another important question I wanted to ask you from your research. In movies and in film, we've always seen, going back to the monarchy, we're having a white horse. I don't know if that is for a more modern sense to differentiate, the white horse represents, the purity, the elite. But in history, did the monarchy, especially Edward I and Edward II, ride atop white horses?
No. I mean, we do get it in literature. We do get it in some manuscript images. And I think this was something that evolved through the ages, that you looked good being painted on a white horse because it was bright, and it had these connections with purity and brightness and light. But in reality, especially in the period I'm looking at, most of the horses were a really boring bay or brown colour. And I think this was because if you rode into warfare on a white horse, you were really a sitting duck. You were a very obvious target. And also, it would be extremely hard to keep that horse clean in all the mud. So you'd always look like you were riding a dirty horse as well, I think. So Edward I, he had a particular liking for coloured horses. I think in America, you'd call them Tobianos and Overos. So these what we call piebald and skewbald horses, which very, very recently come back into fashion, really. But so no, not the white horses, I'm afraid. That's more of a literary and a romantic trope.
And another one which I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on is when we see, and again, film and media as well as some literature, are armored horses where they're like some form of like hawkbird for protection, sometimes chainmail. And of course, going more into the historical fantasy side, there are these depictions of horses in full-on battle armor. Now, from a movie's point of view, that's amazing. But I'm very curious from a historical point of view, especially during the reigns of Edward I and Edward II, did horses wear some kind of protection in a form of chainmail or hawkboard, or was it just their riders who were fully armored?
It definitely in my period they did wear some form of protection, but not that lovely shiny plate that you tend to see in historical films. That came much later when they started to develop plate armor for horses. So during my period, now it was actually obligatory that you brought, if you were a paid army member, you had to bring a horse that had some kind of protection on it. And this is because if you were paid, your horse was actually automatically insured as well. So if you lost your horse, the crown would pay you for the price of your horse. And this encouraged knights to actually bring horses. This is one of the fundamental reasons the horse insurance was brought in. So they wanted them to be protected, partly because it would help save them money, because the horses might be less likely to die.
Right.
But they didn't have the plates. They had you used more mail. They also used boiled leather, really sort of thick boiled leather as well. And that's fantastic stuff because it can be shaped to fit the horse as well and give it basically an extra skin. And also, rather sort of contrary to what you might think, a lot of this leather was actually made out of horsehide. So you've got horses wearing dead horsehide on them. But all this was to protect them against arrows, against swords as well. And it did help, but it didn't give them complete protection. And I've written about the reasons why you couldn't sort of so much encase horses in this mail and this armor to make them sword or arrow proof, because it would be so heavy that they would barely be able to carry it for very long.
Yes, that is very true. And to add to that, one thing I've always seen from a classical point of view are the armored cataphracts of the Sasanians and the late Roman era, and seeing those horses almost in like a mail shirt or a boiled leather shirt from the outset looks ridiculous and funny. But also, as your point, you wanted the armor to be durable enough to protect the horse, but not heavy to where it's going to slow them down. Because a thing to point out, and I think you probably explained this in your research, these horses have to be fast, especially if A, they're in retreat, B, if they're leading a charge, C, if they're doing reconnaissance for the king to see if there's any traps ahead. These horses had to be protected, but also do their duties. And I imagine training these horses was definitely a priority, which that's another thing I want to ask your thoughts on, Dr. Davis. Now, doing a comparison, in World War I, as you mentioned, we have a lot of documentation on how to train war horses. But I'm very curious, in the medieval age, was there sort of like a horse training manual that the monarchy used to train war horses to get them battle ready? And no training manual? Oh, I didn't know.
No, there wasn't. Nothing has survived, put it like that. We do get glimpses from some veterinary treatises where at the front of them they'll put a little bit about how to train a horse, and it can relate to warfare, but it's not really specific to warfare. Xenophon, for instance, he did give us some information on training war horses, but it's not until you get print books coming in. And so we're talking sort of late 15th century, do we start getting manuals of this is how you train your horse. In between that, we've got absolutely nothing. So that my question was, well, how can we find out how they actually trained these horses? And yes, all we can do is sort of pick up some of the hints that are going on what they did. Now the question is, why aren't there any? Why aren't there any manuals of how to train horses? And is it possible that there were some but they just didn't survive? Nothing survived, or, which I think is more likely, is that these horse trainers were being apprenticed. They were learning orally and through practical means from a master, and maybe they didn't actually want to write it down because that's their job, so they're not going to give away the secrets of their trade. I do know Edward I was particularly interested in how his war horses were trained. And we do have orders to one of, I suppose you could call it his horse master, saying
Right.
basically, train them as I have instructed by word of mouth. So he had his ideas of how they should be trained, but he actually told the men who were training them how to do it and how he wanted it done. But no manuals, there is a complete dearth of them. But I think, as I said, perhaps people had their own ideas, or they just didn't necessarily feel the need to write them down for other people to see how they were doing it.
Fascinating. Absolutely, truly fascinating. And from what we've talked about thus far, you are very passionate about not only the equestrian side, but also the military side of how these horses were used in battle, their training, what went into them, and everything. And I definitely feel as historians, we're working on research topics that may or may not have a lot of scholarship, there is that hesitancy to pursue it because, as I've talked with other guests on the show, being an historian, just like being a writer and an author, is a very lonely venture in the beginning because it's all on us. We know the material better than anyone else. And to share our research with others, again, that hesitancy. I've talked with a lot of historians who have told their stories that they told their friends and family, like right from the get-go, they were going to pursue this career, while others have said it was towards the very end after they published their first research paper or academic book that they told them, hey, I'm an historian. For you, Dr. Davis, when did you sort of tell your family and friends that you were not only pursuing this topic, but pursuing this career as an historian?
That was probably around 2014 when I made the decision to quit my job and go to university. And I think that probably surprised quite a few people of why have you chosen to go down this route? And I think I just reached that stage in my life where I thought I really want to do something for me. Like I said, I needed to find those roots as well. And so I think probably at that stage, I was telling them that I wanted to be a historian. At what stage did I say I am a historian? Probably when I graduated with my PhD, I felt that I'd had I'd done that academic achievement. I had that sort of tick in the box. And that's what drove me, I think, to extend it beyond a degree and a master's. It was kind of trying to go as far as I could. And then I got my PhD and I realized that actually the work's only just started. So I've done my first piece of major research, got my book out, but there was so much I couldn't fit in it because obviously you're bound by word constraints, and a PhD is very, very, very tightly focused. And I ended up with a hard drive full of notes and photographs of manuscripts. And there's so much information out there that I would love to share. So I will probably still be writing with one foot in the grave, I think.
All right, all right. And that kind of leads into the next question of what it means to be an historian, especially in the digital age, because the field has changed over the last 20 years. Historians are now using social media to boost their online profile, but social media is very draining. And unfortunately, it does leave us exposed to the other side, the negative side of social media. Because, as I talked to a lot of people on the show, not everyone is social media savvy, or they choose not to be social media savvy because, again, it is a commitment, and B, it is very draining and very taxing. Even though, yes, it allows us to showcase our research and connect with other like-minded individuals in the field, again, the negative side is also very present. And social media does heighten our insecurities and our anxieties about being historians, with the dreaded imposter syndrome sort of trickling in every now and then. So with all that said, Dr. Davis, what disciplined you to continue down this path as a historian, get your book out, and really show people that not only is this book important to the scholarship of history, but that you yourself should be taken seriously?
I think you make a very good point about how the digital age has changed things. In one sense, it's actually been a real positive thing for historians, and that's simply because there's an awful lot of manuscripts now which are digitized, so we can access them. We're starting to find out much more easily what's actually out there. 20, 30 years ago, you might have gone and read through a catalogue and picked a few things, and you'd have quite a limited view really of what's there. We had coronavirus not long after I'd started my PhD, but I was lucky that I could at least do quite a lot of my research just because so much had been digitized. And I'm talking books that I could only access from a library, but more critically, manuscripts that 13th and 14th century manuscripts that are actually in the archives. And I was able, after coronavirus, to actually physically go and see an awful lot more as well. So we've got a lot more information out there. So it's more accessible and it's opening up new doors. So that's a really good positive side. I think another positive side is as well through social media is I was able to make connections and do quite a lot of networking and find out I wasn't the only one. I'm not the only one on the planet that's really into war horses and looking at these. There are other people. And I found the academic community, certainly with the what we call historians, horsey people, were really helpful and really keen to sort of share information. And that kept me going and kept me motivated as well. And I do realise that there is a slightly darker side to social media, and I think you have to have a really thick skin when you start putting stuff out there. How do I get around that? I make sure that what I'm saying, I can back up by facts, and this is where the forensic detective works come in really useful, is that I have these facts to hand. So if anybody says, no, you can't do that, I'll prove that, I'll go, fine. Yeah, I've actually done my research. So it's to be quite rigorous really in your research. And if people still don't want to believe you, or that they give you some comeback on that, then that's their problem.
Yes, absolutely. Very, very true. And this next question, which are fan questions, which I want to ask you, Dr. Davis, in regards to your book. This is a two-parter. So one of my viewers asked, when you began publishing your research in your book, what really surprised you about the academic publishing world? And looking back on it, is there anything you would have done differently in regards to publishing and launching your book?
I think you do learn an awful lot through your first one. I went in completely blind. It was the first book I'd ever published. I think the first thing that surprised me was the amount of time it can take. Is that you think, well, I've got it, it's there, all you've got to do is print them and get them out. But there is quite a long process of it. For instance, the book that I'm writing now, which I reckon will have taken me about a year to write, will probably take another 6 months before it's actually ready to come out on the bookshelves. And this is because it has to go through a peer review process. You can't just write an academic book with a credible publisher and get it printed. They will actually blind peer review it. So they will send it to other experts within that field who will read it, criticize it, suggest any changes that they might have, ask you perhaps to explain something else. It's almost like having your PhD viva all over again, but it's really valuable because you're getting these different perspectives and you're thinking, well, if they didn't quite get that, or they need that explaining more, then it's because I need to make it a little bit more easy for people to read. So yes, the length of time. I've got to admit that the other thing that surprised me was marketing. That what I hadn't realized is that really it's up to the author to make sure to do the marketing and to make sure the marketing's done. I thought that would be largely to do with the publishing house, and perhaps, and I'm sure that all publishing houses are slightly different and have different procedures, how they do it and how they market. But if you really want your book to get out there and people to see it, you're going to have to do a lot of it yourself.
Very true. Very, very true. Let's talk a little bit more about the academic publishing side, the business side of being an historian, as well as being an author. So, once your book was out, Dr. Davis, I like asking this question as not only an historian, but also an author. How did you balance the academic jargon and language that's in the book, but also making it accessible to read? And the reason I ask this because as historians, we are academically taught to write a certain way. We are taught to write for a certain audience, for a certain readership. But even with academic books, reference books, or research books, we do have to be mindful of, yes, our fellow academics are going to read this, and B, possibly the average individual is going to pick this up if it's, an area of history that they enjoy. So how did you balance the academic side to make sure that it was academically sound, but not having it bogged down by the jargon and still being accessible to read for the average Joe?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, because I can remember, especially when I first started as a student, reading some academic books and papers and going, what on earth are they on about? And they were very jargon laden. And I think we're actually moving away from that now in academia, that it's getting less like that. Have I struck the right note? I hope I have. I kind of went down the middle. I thought, yes, I can be academic, and especially rigorously academic by I've had loads of footnotes. It was kind of, to reference. I'm stating this is where you can look to find out where I got it from and more information. But I also have my own voice as well. So I wanted to make it so that really anybody could pick it up and read it. Have I done that? Well, nobody's complained so far, so we'll have to see. But this is when I went to Substack, and
Yes.
I started writing on there, and I thought I can actually sort of pitch it less jargon laden, less academic, but just sort of, and it was a wonderful release actually, that I could just go and write, and I didn't have to heavily prove and reference everything. So I think so the answer to that is I did try and go down the middle of the road. It seems to have worked. I think my professors were very pleased with me. They'd always told me off for writing descriptively, because deep down I really want to write a novel. Really. But I also think that we can also take our history and use that social media to share it with people that perhaps don't want to see that academic jargon, and are just really interested in the story behind everything. Yeah.
Very true. Absolutely 100% agree. And I think also as historians, we look at the business side. One thing I did think is important to discuss is, as historians, especially in this field, there's always two paths presented to us. Either we work in academia or we work in some kind of government level job. Because that's always the only two paths presented to us once we graduate from the field of history. But I definitely feel that the historian field itself has that middle ground, that untouched third option. But they don't really teach that as much as they should in academia and university, which I think is a big disservice. When I was still getting my master's in history, I had the opportunity to go to a seminar that was all about using your degree beyond academics. And that's where I met an individual, an historian, who was also a world-renowned author. I instantly took a liking to this person, and from there, based my whole career off of just that, using my degree, using my passion for history, but carving my own path. And I definitely feel that needs to be taught in all universities around the world for the field of history. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Dr. Davis, that do you believe, or actually, do you think that this should be a must for history students to show them that there are options beyond academia and government jobs in terms of using history when it's used in the workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I can't remember even having that conversation at university about what you actually do with your degree. I think it would, like you said, it is assumed that you'll either end up going into academia if you can get into academia, because at the moment in this country the arts and humanities is crumbling because of lack of funding. So the job market has shrunk alarmingly. Or you'd go into some sort of government or civil service or become a prime minister, because quite a few of those have got history degrees as well. Yes, it would be. I mean, you learn so much just by getting that education and studying history, and you develop that sense of critical thinking and that way to evaluate things as well, that there probably are more middle of the road ones. I'd be interested to know what that middle of the road is, you know, what actually falls into it. Yes, that's something that really needs to be considered.
And also with that in mind, I definitely think what also needs to be taught in academia, especially for history students and for all students, is networking. Networking as a historian is vital. And I've had the opportunity to meet so many incredible individuals from different aspects, from different avenues, different research eras of history. And it's helped me in my own research and my own writing as well. And I would like to hear, Dr. Davis, if there are any people who have helped you in your career, professional or personal, that you would like to give a personal shout out to.
The first person would definitely be my daughter, who has watched her mother reverse roles and become a student and go through many years of study, and has always supported me. But also, I think, like you as well, networking, and that's something I think we really need to teach students as well, is how to network, because I always knew that networking was important, but I had to learn myself really of how to do that, and that was through conferences and various online conferences as well. But it's a difficult one. There are so many people that I've met that have motivated me and have not pushed me to keep going, but have sort of have encouraged me. I had people, particularly there was a few people of my lecturers who I can name, and there's probably not too many to name, who I thought that just made it so interesting. And then I thought, this is what I need to do. I need to be able to bring it across to people like they are, because they've hooked me. It's not just a dates, facts, figures, and that's what you learn in school, isn't it? It was more of the stories behind it and the motivations and what else was going on, and that really hooked me. So I'd like to thank most of my lecturers actually at university for giving me that kind of motivation.
Nice. Very, very nice. And we're almost nearing the end of this incredible story interview. So I have a few last questions I did want to ask. The one I think is important to discuss is, as we talked about, the field of history has changed within the last 20 years, and that's, of course, due to social media. I think more recently with the COVID lockdown has really changed the field in of itself in terms of new voices entering the discipline. And I absolutely love that. But this has sparked a debate that I've seen a long time, which is, well, context for this. I've always believed that in this industry, there are two types of people: those that are historians and those who want to be known as historians, which are two very different goal-oriented positions and ideologies. One is dedicated to the field of history. The other is dedicated to the business side, getting out there and stuff like that. And I definitely think because of the lockdown, you did have more people pursuing history, making content, whether podcasters, YouTubers, fellow authors, and that's great. But it's also weeded out those that are passionate about the field and those that are just trying to make a quick buck and trying to add clout. Because one thing that is important to note, this is not an industry to get rich quick, unfortunately. Would I like it to be not true? Absolutely, but that's not the case. So for you, Dr. Davis, I'm very curious. In your opinion, seeing the trend in history, do you believe that we are in a golden age in regards to the new voices, or more so of an iron age because we've now been able to see those who are truly passionate about the field really contribute to its survival.
Wow, that is some question. And I think that's the same question that the Victorians asked, and perhaps the chroniclers asked as well, is that, are we in a golden age? And they all think they are, and they all think that they are either the best or they're the most historically informed, and that other people aren't. So that question, I think, has been going on a very long time. Are we in a golden age or the Iron Age? We're just in an age. I mean, I think we just endlessly repeat ourselves, and I think the next generation will come along and go, did they really know what they were talking about? We're in the historical age now. We've got perhaps AI to do our history for us. Exactly. So, and that's a scary one. So if we are in a golden age, then I think we're very much at a tipping point to do with AI producing that. I've got no beef with people putting themselves out there on YouTube and, like you say, trying to make a buck out of history. To me, as long as history gets out there and people get interested in it, then it moves forward, and it keeps, and like I say, it keeps the whole subject alive. No, you'll never make money out of really being a historian or an academic writer. That was never my motivation to do it. I was very motivated to publish, to get a book out. And that was, maybe that was just to give me a sense of immortality, that I had actually found some information and had as a lifelong book lover, to actually have my name on the cover of a book was probably my greatest ever achievement. So that was one of my motivations to do that. I don't know whether I've answered your question. It's actually calculating.
I think you did. I think it, you know, it's kind of like in the middle. Yes, we are in a golden age because of the new voices, but I definitely think we're in an iron age because, you know, new voices have been settled. The new voices have settled down and really figured out who they want to be, what kind of historians they want to be. And with that in mind, we now arrive at the final two questions, Dr. Davis. And here they are. The first one is, with everything you've learned in the field of history and personally yourself, what is your word of wisdom to fellow historians and authors wanting to get into this field? And secondly, in regards to your research and your book, what do you want fellow historians and academics to take away from your research and writing?
My advice to people who want to get into history and study history is read. Just read absolutely everything and anything you can, but bear in mind that going more towards academic books that are from like credible publishers like Yale, you're going to get something that's much more, when I say academically rigorous, I mean more faithful to the facts, really. So just read and enjoy it. Do it for the love of it. Don't do it for money or any other reason apart from the fact that you love it and you want to learn. And it will give you a lot back as well. From my research and the book I published and the one that's coming, what's my message to people out there? I have a particular personal message, actually, because I went to university in my late 40s. So, and I went all the way through and I got a PhD and I achieved a lifelong dream very late, but I achieved it nonetheless. So my message is that it's never too late. It's never too late to learn. It's never too late to start studying history, and it's never too late to achieve your dreams.
Very beautifully said, Dr. Davis. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing historians interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. A huge thank you to Dr. Davis for making her official debut here on the show. Now, Dr. Davis, where can people find you if they wanted to connect with you, and where can people buy a copy of your book on warhorses?
If you Google Emma Herbert-Davies Warhorses, you will get to Trivent website, which published it. I'm also available on Amazon and most UK bookshops. I know I'm in the US, but I'm not quite sure where they are at the moment with that particular one. But I can also be found on Twitter, X, and Substack.
Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. As always, viewers and listeners, thank you once again for joining us for an amazing episode here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. A huge thank you to Dr. Davis for making her official debut here on the channel. And if you'd like to see her back on the show, possibly talking about specifically war horses under Edward I and Edward II, comment down below and subscribe and like this video. And until next time, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Have a wonderful morning, everybody, and we'll see you all next time.